And now, ladies and gentlemen, Skywalker.
Thank you, Jim Davis, and thank you for tuning in to Radio Memories here on June 17th, 2023. Great show for you today. We actually have a newsman. I've convinced Ken Jeffries to come in. He's a longtime radio personality, but we know him as an LA radio news veteran. He's been at KNX, KFWB, KABC, where he still is. And we're going to talk to Ken Jeffries today about his radio memories. Joining us from his home in Canoga Park, California, in the beautiful San Fernando Valley. That's what we'd like to call it.
You know, the home of porn stars and, your favorite porno movies.
That's where they make them, right here.
Yep.
It's our special guest today, Los Angeles radio news veteran, Ken Jeffries. Ken, it is such a pleasure to have you on Radio Memories.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be asked to do it, and I've been wanting to do this for a while because I saw some of your other ones too. So,
well, I'm glad you found some time. I really do. Are you pretty much retired now? Or are you still working?
Well, I'm working part-time on weekends. I do newscasts for KABC Radio and for a station in Dallas.
Oh,
so we do the news from Dallas, from Canoga Park to Dallas. But I'm not AI yet.
Well, thank goodness. So where does it begin with you in beautiful Los Angeles, California?
Well, it all started, it's the old Ted Baxter line. It all started at a 500-watt radio station. For me, I grew up in New York and Long Island, as we would call it. And I wanted to be, I listened to WABC, was my favorite station as a kid growing up in the 60s. I wanted to be Big Dan Ingram. And I thought he was, he was the best top 40 DJ I ever heard. And so I kind of wanted to be that. And but I couldn't break into New York because it's a market number one. So I started in 1972 in Berwick, Pennsylvania, at it was obviously a 250-watt coffee pot radio station. And
now, at this point, are you a jock on the air? You're not doing news.
It was both.
Oh, okay.
It was actually both. Yeah, I spent many years as a disc jockey, playing the hits, Stacks of Wax, Mounds of Sound, And
we're doing a Saturday Night Live bit from the 70s, kids.
Yeah, I mean it's Tom Snyder would always talk about that too, and Stacks of Wax, Mounds of Sounds, and all of that. And let's
fire up the color teenies.
The color teeny, yeah, the fine with the smoking. And I met Tom years ago. I did a Betty White telethon. I was the announcer for that here in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
Pet telethon. He was a co-host, and I met him backstage. That was kind of cool. But anyway,
yeah, I met him too. Wasn't he a cool guy? I mean, he was just a very interesting man.
I met his daughter, Annie. Who was a Facebook friend, and about when I belonged to News Geezers, among others, News Geezers, and they had a tribute to Tom Snyder and to, Eyewitness News and all that other, and he was part of that in New York, and he was part of Channel 4 here in Los Angeles, as you know, and he worked all around, and yeah. So the last words Tom said to me as he drove off, we did the show, it was on KCAL Channel 9, but it was broadcast out of KCET in Hollywood, and he says, "See you later, young fella." And that was it. And I think he passed away a few months after that in Northern California. But anyway, that was Tom. So 1972, so I started in Berwick, Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania, and that was kind of a wild time. Roy Cohen, we found out Roy Cohen, the old Joe McCarthy's right-hand man, was a silent partner in the radio station. We found out during that time, and the conditions were kind of bad. We had no drinking water except in the bathroom. So we had to drink 7-Up. We had a 7-Up machine, and I constantly belched on the air. When I did the news, the mic switch, every time I had a belch, the microphone was terrible, and the mic would always leak. Vietnam was real big then, and I've had to pronounce and Phnom Penh today, and all of a sudden you hear me belching for the soda that I had. When I first showed up at that job, the program director said to me, I wore a suit, and he said to me, "If you can read, you have a job." And I said, "Oh, thank you. That's a great qualification." So, that's what I did. So I was there for a few months, and I got hired at a slightly bigger station in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Let's see. Then for a little while, then I took a job in Indiana which was a mistake because I hated it. I hated Indiana. And
what part of Indiana did you work?
it was Lafayette, Indiana, which was
Okay.
it's north of Indianapolis. And
Yeah.
I'm Jewish, and I caught a bunch of some anti-Semitism and stuff like that.
Were you the only? I was just going to say, were you the only Jew?
Probably.
I would.
Yeah, this is,
Jesus.
Jeffries is not my real name. My last name is. But,
Yeah.
but I changed it for radio. No, seriously, I mean, I did.
Yeah.
It's
Well, people
that's
do. Yeah, sure.
yes. You had to be careful. And just jumping forward a little bit, when I got to LA, I worked at KFWB. I worked with a gentleman named Don Herbert, who was one of our anchors. A lovely man, passed away a few years ago. His real name was Herbert Rosenblum, and he started in Alabama. And I said to him, like an idiot, I said to him, "Why did you change your name for radio?" And he says, "Because I started in Alabama."
I didn't want to die.
And by then, my parents had moved from Long Island to Pennsylvania. They moved to Southern California, and I decided I'm going to join them out there. My sister and brother-in-law moved too, and I went out on a vacation a year or two earlier, and I loved the place. And so palm trees, cool. I didn't have to shovel snow anymore, thank God.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I got here, and I put an ad in Radio and Records, R&R. And a couple of weeks later, I got a job in Santa Maria at KC 148, your station with your hits. And the owner, it was a daytime station. And so the owner flew in from Chicago, and he says, "I have an idea for a slogan. KC 148, as bright as the day is long." And I was thinking, okay, what do we do after sunset? Good night, everybody. And I would go on the rival station, KUHL, disguised as somebody else. And we did fake traffic reports on my friend's show, and helicopter reports in Santa Maria.
Yeah.
And I would go like that. And I beat my chest like I was in a helicopter. The beat, look down, And we had a traffic backup on the Orchid Y, which was a major intersection in Santa Maria. So I did that, and so I got canned from that job, and then I went to work in Pismo Beach at a radio station there, and I actually replaced, in a way, Weird Al Yankovic. And years later, I met him at his Hollywood Star. And I sent you a picture of that. You may see it. So I went to work for the station in Pismo Beach, KPGA, which has nothing to do with the Professional Golf Association or Live Golf now with the Saudis. Anyway, that's a political statement, I guess. Yeah. It was a station where it was a soft rock station, and so you had me, Randy Cardoon, and you had later Weird Al after I left. So I never met him at that station. And we could never, as funny as we thought we were, we could never ad lib. We had to read liner cards, and that was bad. And what was really bad for me was, the owners were nice, but what was bad for me was we belonged to the ABC radio network, and then down the line you could hear and cue Dan Ingram from WABC, and I got homesick all over again for New York, as I'd be listening to it. Oh man, and here I am in Pismo Beach. What am I doing? So I'm in Pismo Beach, not really making money. Finally, my mother said to me, "Look, why don't you? There's an opening in the Los Angeles Unified School District for teachers. Seriously, I quit the business for a little while. I wanted to make some money, so I went to live with my parents.
Get a real job.
Yeah, get a real job. My parents by then were living in Woodland Hills. So I taught for about 2 years, and it was terrible. The money was good, relatively good. It was a lot more than I was making in radio. But by then, a job opened up in Thousand Oaks at a radio station owned by Jim Simon. I don't know if you know the name, but he'd worked around. He'd been known. He was former program director at KABC, where I am now. But anyway, he gotten fired like from some of the best places, because he always did things his way,
Yeah.
He was like the Frank Sinatra of radio personalities, always did it his way. But he was great, and he was like a mentor. He became like a mentor to me. And so I was there. I became a news director there, and I was a disc jockey for a while. And then they had to get rid of the news director because the news director had a conflict of interest. He was his name was Don Zimring, and Zimring ended up reporting on a Las Virgenes teacher strike, but he was also an executive with the Las Virgenes Unified School District. So that was
conflict of interest.
So I ended up becoming news director, which was really cool. And I wanted to do that anyway, pretty much all along. And Jim essentially told me how to write. I had no idea what news writing was about. I was terrible at it, but gradually.
And the radio station
you learn.
was all comedy, correct?
Well, it later became comedy, but for a long time, and it was a station where a bunch of LA people came from. Jack Popejoy, the late Jack Popejoy from KFWB, once worked there. I didn't know him from Thousand Oaks, but I knew him from KFWB. Johnny Darren, who I later met at KFWB, was also at KGOE. This station was KGOE in Thousand Oaks at 850 on your AM dial.
Mm-hmm.
And one time at that time we were a daytime station, KGOE, and we also carried Dallas Cowboys football. And it was kind of like a news and talk station in the morning or something, and it would play music for the rest of the day. And Jim Simon and my longtime friend Ginny Pryor, who helped get me into Thousand Oaks, because I worked with her in Pismo Beach also. So they did the morning show, and it was really cool. And then Ginny would go out and sell airtime, and that was also, of course, a great way to make money in those days. Sometimes more than the air staff would. But one time we carried Dallas Cowboys football because the Cowboys trained in Thousand Oaks at Cal Lutheran at the time, and so we were approaching sunset, and in the afternoon, Jim and Ginny and I did too. I filled in. They did an afternoon news block also. We were coming up on 6 o'clock local sign-off time in Thousand Oaks at the time.
Right. We
knew KOA in Denver was also 8:50 a.m. and they were part of the CBS radio network, and they were going to carry the game because it was part of the CBS radio Monday Night Football package, which featured the Dallas Cowboys that night. So Jim says, we got to go off the air here at KGOE Thousand Oaks. Good night, everybody. But stand by for Dallas Cowboys football at 8:50 on your dial. And so we went off, and KOA Denver booms into Thousand Oaks, and that's the kind of stuff, that's the kind of stuff we did. We had Bob Taylor was a morning man. I don't know if you knew who Bob Taylor was. And I've lost touch with him. I have no idea if you're there, Bob, give me a call, or we'll talk to you on Facebook or something. You never know now, because some of these people may have passed, and we just don't know. So we would play the comedy tapes, everything was on cassette in those days,
Yeah.
Bill Cosby, before his legal problems, obviously, was a big deal. People I want to hear Bill Cosby. And one morning, like an idiot, we did the top, 500 comedy cuts of the year or something. Like an idiot, I started running them in reverse because I couldn't understand the sheet. I played number one first, but we had 0 listeners anyway, pretty much. So as soon as I realized my mistake, I backed up. Okay, it's number 500 again. So we went back from that. But it was kind of fun. I met a bunch of comedians there. Jay Leno came in, and I wish I had the tape of that someplace. I think I donated to the Thousand Oaks Library. Jonathan Winters came in and was as crazy as ever. Bill Dana came in. That was kind of cool. Brad Garrett, he had just become big on Star Search. He was, so that was kind of cool to meet all these people,
And so when is it that you finally get to KFWB?
Okay, KFWB was just going back a little bit to when Jim Simon, when the station,
as you can see here in our studio,
yes,
we have KFWB here on the. Can you see it? It's the building on our computer there.
Oh yeah, I do see it. I do see that.
That's right. So
the old building featured in La Bamba.
Yeah, that's exactly.
There's a story
right.
about that.
Yeah.
They told us to move the car the night before they were going to film. They said, "Please move your car seriously, so they can put in the 1950s cars." That was the shot that was seen in La Bamba, the movie.
Yeah,
because the back of the station doubled as the front of the station because it really looked like the front of a radio station.
Yeah. Yeah. So that must have been really exciting to break into LA. I mean, here you are, and it's got to be different than anything you've experienced, because KFWB
but the strange part was that my old boss by then at Comedy Radio, a guy named Bob Zidell, who was the general manager of the station, held my job open in case I didn't make it at KFWB, which was nice of him to do. He didn't have to do that. So I went in there with like a little safety net, sort of.
Sure.
I was at WB from 1986, and I started on the overnight shift. We were big in hospitals and police calls and all of that stuff, as you probably know. I ended up being on the air for the Northridge earthquake and morning drive, actually, because I was filling in for, I'll just give you the highlights real quick, for Dan Avey, the late Dan Avey. He had elective surgery that morning, but I was on we were getting ready to go on the air, and then we actually had an overnight tape on the air, and from Don Herbert, who was working the Sunday night shift. And so we stopped the tape, and you hear the bulletin sound effect, and I still have the tape of that, and it's around, and I said, KFWB news time 4:32. Now, the earthquake was 4:31. We waited because the editor screamed at me, get in there. Get in the booth, get on the air. I said, I will when it stops shaking, okay?
Yeah.
And we were lucky. Our chief engineer, Richard Rudman, a lovely man, still around, double Velcroed everything and bolted everything to the wall. We lost almost nothing. I think we lost a clock that fell off. Well, if you listen to us versus K&X, which was our competitor at the time, they had, cartridges flying around all over the place, and it wasn't really very good. But we were on the air all that time. Very proud of our coverage of the Northridge earthquake, and it's I think we're coming up at some big anniversary, I guess next year or whatever it is. Yeah, maybe the 30th anniversary this coming year, I think.
And I still believe that Scott Mason at K-Rock, I got off the air. I was doing 7 to midnight. I got off the air at midnight at Star 98.7. And Scott said, come. We were in the same Dalt's building in Burbank.
That same night?
And what's that?
That same night?
Yeah, the same night. I mean, the night before the earthquake. Yes. So I got off at midnight. He got on at midnight on K-Rock. And he says, why don't you come and hang out with me, and then we'll go have breakfast at 5 when I get off the air. And, so my wife wasn't happy with that. And I said, about 3 in the morning, I said, Scott, I'm really tired. I get home about 3:35, 3:45. And of course, my wife is up and she's not pleased with me. It's like, you got off the air at midnight and I stayed awake waiting for you. And as we're arguing, it becomes about 4:31.
Oh.
And this great giant earthquake. So the first thing I did was call my radio station, Star 98.7, the one I was on. Nobody answered.
Right. I remember Star. You sure I do.
And I called then Scott to make sure he was okay at K-Rock.
And I met him too. I got to know him a little bit too. A lovely man.
We had known each other since we were kids. We literally, he was 16, I was 14 when we first met.
Oh my God.
So when I called Scott, he says, go on the air with me. I go, I can't. I'm at Star 98.7. He goes, I don't care. Just go on the air with me. We're going to go on and talk about the earthquake.
It just occurred. Were you competitors? Star 98, were they owned by different companies?
Yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah, we were Star 98.7 at that point was owned by Viacom, and K-Rock was owned by Infinity.
Infinity, yeah. When we were Infinity, I think. Yeah, I remember also in the morning of the earthquake, though, and I was anchoring. All of a sudden, we were on all these different stations. I had to give like 4 different station IDs at the top of the hour. We were on KZLA, which I don't think we were on. I guess we were Infinity. I don't think we owned that. I had to say KZLA. No. On KTLA channel 5, I think, or the audio was on channel 5 or some crazy thing.
Oh yeah.
And on the wave, KTWV, I was spouting out call letters.
You have won 4 Golden Globe Mic Awards, most notably for the LA riot coverage.
Actually, 10. Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
But a lot of those were
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It's but again, I used to have them displayed on the mantle, and we put them all in storage, and we didn't forget about them. But yeah, one time I ended up working for a time with the late Vince Campagna. And I loved him. We were both Laker fans, and that was really cool. We'd be in the booth together doing a handoff, watching Magic Johnson on the TV with the Laker. That was nuts. But I asked him about golden mics, and he said, "Yeah, I got some of their doorstops now in my garage, in my house." Wow! I just wanted to win one, so I won the one called the riot reports right after the LA riots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I proposed a series to my boss, Greg Tanham, at the time, and we went with it, and I won my first one, and the others just followed. Yeah, one
Then
for
you got one for the O.J. Simpson chase.
yeah, we called it O.J. Simpson Lost and Found. That because that was a crazy day. We didn't know where he was. I mean, remember a 911 call from Bundy. We thought it was O.J. committing suicide, ready to commit suicide.
Right,
No one
that's
knew.
right.
No one knew.
Right.
It was crazy. The L.A. riots was yeah, I was on the air for that, and it was what else? A lot of stuff going on for all that time, and then in 2009. I think CBS was figuring, you know what, we're going to sell the station. Well, they were over the cap in the number of stations that they owned in LA or something, and they had to get rid of one, and we were it.
And it lasted. It stayed around for a long, long period of time.
Yeah, it should have stayed longer, and I think CBS could have, had they stayed in radio, which they didn't, of course, but they could have kept it going. I think they could have, but I guess they figured it's too expensive, and we don't want to do it anymore. And okay, you know.
You know, usually on Radio Memories, we talk to old disc jockeys that you know have built their career. No, not old. I mean, but hello, how are you? I've been doing this in the '60s. We were kicking ass playing.
It's a very good Aunt Blabby routine you're
that's
doing.
What I'm trying to do. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know why. But it, now I've lost my train of thought.
Talking about old disc jockeys.
Usually on this program, it's about old top 40 disc jockeys. And it's interesting because you're the first newsman that we've had. And I appreciate that because
to be an old newsman. It's
no, you're the first newsman that we've had on Radio Memories. And well, because I grew up with, the best, with J. Paul Huddleston and B.R. Bradbury here, and because I grew up in Southern California, and I got to meet and know a lot of these people. And then there was Marv Howard and Lyle Kilgore, and I worked with Lyle.
I worked with Lyle at KF. I loved him. I worked with him at the end of his career, obviously, but and I loved him and his wife, and he passed, and then she passed, and then that was real sad. But a lovely man.
He was a lovely man, but being in news, you had a lot of probably just as fun as we had, just being crazy disc jockeys. You got to interview some incredible people.
Yeah,
you've reported on incredible things that have happened in the world and in California. And in Southern California, I was going to say SoCal, and then I caught myself. Because I'm so accustomed being here for so long, we used to just say Southern California. Now everybody just says SoCal.
Or Southland. I know. In Chicago, I know they call it Chicagoland. Okay, like it's a country.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do come back. And what a pleasure it was talking about your great stories, and I can hardly wait to have you back on Radio Memories. Ken Jeffries, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Check out past interviews on the Radio Memories YouTube channel and on Spotify. Click the links. This is Maggie McKay for Radio Memories, a Dave Schuyler production.
Radio Memories.